Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today, we're going to be going over how to set up a Synology NAS for a complete beginner. This is really going to be geared to people who have never set up a NAS before, and really is going to be going over all the most basic things, and it's going to be in Synology DSM 7.2. So DSM is the operating system that the Synology runs. So Synology is a NAS, so it's actually a server in here. So it's its own computer, and so it has its own operating system. And that is DSM, or Disk Station Manager. And DSM 7.2 is the most recent version that has just come out, so that is what you will be installing. And so this guide is really geared towards people who this is the first time they've set up a NAS, and it's going to be the most basic stuff. There are going to be a few really important things we do need to set up, specifically BTRFS Snapshots, that are going to be very crucial to have, and you will just be able to forget about them until you need them, and then they're there to save you. And so I'm really going to focus on adding features here that are really crucial rather than just stuff that's going to add to unnecessary complexity. So the few things we are going to be adding in additionally than just the basic NAS are going to be things that are super crucial to making sure your NAS is safe, and that if anything happens, you have a very easy way to undo it. And so that's really going to be the focus of this. I'm also going to bring up a couple of extra things as we go through the video that can really help you kind of secure your NAS additionally, and some additional features. But the real focus of this is the basic startup for somebody who's just starting out. All right, and so before we get started, I actually do Synology and other business IT consulting professionally. And so if you are looking for somebody to remotely set all of this stuff up for you and get it all working, go ahead and check out the link down in the description, the Hire Me link. You can absolutely hire me for any project, no matter how small or how large. All right, back to the actual tutorial. And we're going to talk about first the NAS. So this is going to more or less assume that you've already purchased a Synology NAS. If you have not already, right now I would really recommend a 4-bay NAS as the starter if you think you're going to need a lot of space. And I generally like buying only 2 drives to start out, and that way you can expand out as you need to. And we're going to be setting up what's called a RAID system, or a redundant system. It is not a backup, but it is protection against hardware failure. And so whenever you're thinking about how much space you have, simply subtract one of the disks you have and use that for redundancy. And so then any one of your disks can fail, and you will not lose any data. Note, you still need to back up your important data, but it is a nice to have that keeps you running, and so even if one hard drive fails, you can keep going. All right, so this right here is the DS923 Plus, and the way you install your hard drives is up front right here. There are 2 different types. Normally, it's either push in and pull out, or in this one, it's just a pull out. So you just pull out these plastic trays, and you put in your drives like this. They're kind of difficult to figure out at first, but there are 2 plastic covers on either side that go into the hard drive screw holes, so that way you don't need any tools to install these. To do it, all you need to do is pop them off by pulling off the side on both ends, and then you slide in your hard drive with the metal teeth next to the black plastic at the end, and it only goes in one way. Then there are 4 grommets, 2 on either side, that are rubber, and if you look in them, you should see the screw hole. You're going to then clip back in your sides right here. And you're good to go. The hard drive will only go in one direction. So if it clips in and it's secure, you know it is in there. It should be flat against the back side right here, and then the teeth should be right next to it. So it's not too bad to set up, but especially the very first time, some of these are kind of hard to pop off, so it can be a little bit difficult. So once you've done that, all you need to do is slot in and lock it back in place. Most also come with a key that you can turn to lock it additionally, so that way if you have a kid who's running around, or even just employees who mess with stuff, you can lock them, and that way it makes sure that people have to actually think about unlocking it rather than just clicking and pulling out. So if somebody just goes in and wants to mess with it, they're not going to accidentally pull out a drive while the thing's running, and it's actually just a simple Allen key if you ever lose it, so you don't need to worry about that. Then on the back is the very important thing, and that is the network ports. So a NAS stands for Network Attached Storage, the keyword being their network. If you're used to like external drives like this, you're used to just plugging them directly into your computer. That's because this is called a DAS, or Direct Attached Storage. With a NAS, it is network attached. And so you actually talk to this completely over Ethernet. So that can either be over wired Ethernet, or Wi-Fi. There are going to be at least 1 or up to 4 network ports on the back of your NAS. All you need to do is plug one of those into a switch, or this can also be into your Wi-Fi router. Ideally, to get the best performance when you're transferring files from your computer to the NAS, it's really nice to also have your computer hooked up to wired Ethernet, because that will give you the best possible speeds, but it will absolutely still work over Wi-Fi, especially if you're just transferring photos and things like that. It's a good place to start, but if you feel like it's a little slow, wired Ethernet will make a massive difference. And so all you're going to need to do is plug one of these Ethernet cables into the back of your router. Only do one of them to start until you've learned more, and then go ahead and plug in the power. And then all you gotta do is press the power button up front, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna do that really quick right here, and then we're gonna get on our computer to set up the NAS from then on. The NAS is completely controlled over the internet, over a web browser. So it's very easy to go ahead and do. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and we're gonna go over the next steps. I'm just gonna plug in the Ethernet cable, power, and then turn it on. So I've just plugged the NAS in, hit the power button, and now the light is blinking blue, and I can see here the hard drive starting to spin up. It's going to beep once the NAS has booted, and then we'll know. So we're just gonna go ahead and wait until we hear the beep, and then we know the NAS is booted and ready to start talking to us. That was the beep, perfect timing. And so now we're gonna go on our computer right here, and we are going to open up our web browser and go to find.synology.com. And this is automatically going to find the NAS on our network. Since I run a lot of NASs, I'm going to see a lot of things here, but you probably will only see the one. So I'm just going to go directly to it, and you should see it right here. The status likely will be not installed. And so we're just going to go ahead and connect her on in and go through our first time setup stuff. And so now we're just going to go ahead and install DSM on here. So you will not get this page. I'm just running the most recent version, which is the release candidate, which means I'm filming this video early. So it's having me do this manually, but you will not get this page. Instead, you will just get an install page and it will automatically run through. I'm going to wait till the full version is out before posting this video to make sure that is true, but don't worry about this. You will just see a install now button, but I'm just going to manually upload the file because I'm doing this early. You will then get told, hey, all data will be deleted. One thing to know, this is a NAS, so it's got to install its own operating system on there. So if there's anything on the hard drives that you want to keep, stop right now, unplug them, and go ahead and make sure you've got that all copied over, because installing DSM on here will format the drives, and so you will lose all data that is currently stored on there, so remember that. But if they're new drives, just hit OK. And now, it's just going to go ahead and say, installing Disk Station Manager. This process can take about maybe 10 minutes at the most normally, and so we'll just go ahead and come back once this is done. It's non-linear. As you can see, it jumped from 8 to 40% in about half a second there. So it's not completely linear. So you just give it a few minutes to complete, and you will know it's done when you hear the next beep, because that means it has rebooted. So I'm just gonna go fast forward through this and we will get back when it's done. And there was our first beep. And so now it should be very much close to being done. We are now just gonna have to wait for the packages to install, and then it's just gonna pop up here. So overall, I was answering emails while this is going. It runs very easily and you don't have to touch anything. It's great. All the setup stuff just starts at the very beginning and you enter everything in. And then next, we're just gonna have to set up our volumes and things like that. All right, and so now it has gone ahead and fully installed. And now it says, welcome to DSM 7.2. Let's go ahead and hit start. So first off, we're going to go ahead and add a device name. This is essentially how it's going to show up on the network. So when you see it in macOS Finder or Windows File Explorer, this is the name it's going to be. So I'm just going to call it DS923, keep it easy. And now you're going to enter an administrator account. So this is going to be one of the places that I had mentioned earlier where you can do some things for extra security. If you're just a basic home user, you don't need to worry about this. But if you are running a business, I would really recommend having 2 accounts for yourself, especially if you're going to have kind of more users and have a little bit more complex setups. you're going to want to have an administrator account for yourself and a regular account for yourself. So for basic home users, don't worry about this. Just type in your name here and you're going to be the admin because you probably only have one account, maybe 2 accounts total. But for businesses, you can do something like will admin. And then you're also going to create yourself a regular user account. And so that way you get more security because you only ever sign into DSM as an admin when you need to do admin things. Whereas if you're logging in for just accessing files, you'll just use your regular user account. To keep this very simple, because this is very much a beginner guide, we're just going to stick with will. So that's my name here. And then a password. Note, there are options we can do here that can make this accessible on the internet. So make sure that this is not a basic password like password or anything that's easily guessable. You want to do at least probably 8 characters with multi-case and all that good stuff, because you do not want this to be just a simple password, especially if you choose later on to open this up to the internet. And I'm going to allow this to be displayed in Web Assistant, so that way we can use it more easily to find it later on. I'll say the password. Now you have an option to say when you want to update your NAS. For the vast majority of users, the default of automatically install important DSM packages is exactly what I would recommend. This means if there's ever a massive security vulnerability found in DSM, it will automatically update that patch because that is something you want to update immediately. Whereas if it's just a little bug fix or something like that, it will not automatically update. Instead, it will wait for you to update. And so that way you don't update unless you need to, and you can have a little bit more control of it. I highly recommend this for everybody. Now, I would highly recommend signing in with a Synology account. You can create an account here, or you can just sign if you already got one. Or if you want the maximum privacy, you can also just skip this and host it only locally, but you do lose out on some benefits. The biggest reason why I recommend everybody sign in with a Synology account is because of Active Insight, automatically having emails for something like a hard drive dying, so that way you can always get notified if your NAS is having an issue. So I'm just going to sign in now, or you can just create an account there. And now you have the option to set up what's called Quick Connect. Quick Connect is great, but it also does have a security implication. What Quick Connect does is it allows you to access your NAS wherever you are in the world. Right now, you will only be able to access the NAS within your home's network or your office's network. If you add Quick Connect, you can access it from wherever in the world. There is a security implication of this because now anybody can access your NAS from wherever in the world. I'm not saying they can get into the NAS, but they would be able to see it. So you leave yourself vulnerable in 2 possible ways, both of them highly unlikely, but you should be aware of it. The first is if somebody starts password guessing. So as long as you have a strong password, we're going to set up auto block on here so they'll automatically get blocked. But you don't want to open up your NAS to the internet if your password is password, because then somebody may just guess that and get in. The second, which is something you do not have as much control over, is what if one day Synology had a vulnerability in it that allowed anybody to access it? I think that's highly unlikely, so it's something for you to be aware of. It's really unlikely. I personally use Quick Connect, and it's great for setting things up, and I'm able to share files very easily, but you should think about it. So you can choose to have a Quick Connect right here. I'm going to go ahead and skip it. And now, what I would really recommend adding is enable Synology Active Insight. It's a free license for up to 3 per account, and DSM configuration backup. Both of these are free, and it can just be very nice. Then, now with DSM 7.2, you can also have email notifications, which is just great. So this way you don't have to have complex setups to get notified if anything's going on with the NAS. You can also help Synology with better data by enabling diagnostic services, but that is up to you. So I would definitely enable these 3, and then the 4th one is up to you. So now we've just got in, and this right here is DSM. It's now popped up with the option to install 3 basic packages that a lot of people will use right off the bat. So Synology Photos is something I probably would recommend most home users install. It allows you to easily manage all of your photos and even back up your iPhone or Android photo library to the NAS. Then Synology Drive and Synology Office are really paired, and they turn your NAS into much more of a Google Drive feel, And so you can start editing documents on there. You can share files with people very easily. You can sync files to your computer, a lot of stuff like that. And so if you want to, you can just install all those right now. For the purpose of this video, we're keeping it very basic. I have dedicated videos for all of these. So I'm just gonna say no thanks. And now it also recommends you enable two-factor authentication. I'm not gonna go over that because that's additional complex setups, and I've got a video for that. But if you are opening your NAS to the internet, I would highly recommend enabling two-factor authentication, but I'm gonna say no for now. So now they have a tour that you can go through and run, but instead we're gonna keep this basic and just run through the most basic things. So there are 3 apps that you're going to be using most often over here. The first off is the Package Center. Think of it like every other app store. It's where you install all of your software on there. Then there's Control Panel. Control Panel is where you can have all of your settings, and that's where we're going to be setting up everything for now. And then there's File Station, which will show you your files, and you can see them also on your computer and things like that, but it's a great web interface for your files, really basic to use. Additional applications are up here. And so the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is go into Storage Manager. Storage Manager is where you go through and you actually set up your drives. So we're going to go into Storage Manager. You may get a pop-up as well saying, hey, you don't have any volumes, install one. So we're going to click on Storage Manager, and we are going to go ahead and install our first volume and pool. So a pool is basically all hard drives grouped together, and then a volume is where you put the data on top of that. Generally, for the vast majority of users, you're only going to have one pool, one volume, except for a specific case that I'm going to talk about in a minute here. So we're going to hit Start, and we're going to choose our RAID type. I have a video going over different RAID types that I will leave down in the description. It kind of explains them all. For the vast majority of users, I would recommend just SHR or RAID 5 or RAID 6, depending on what you've got your setup with. So anybody who has 6 disks or less, go with SHR or RAID 5. And if you have more than 6 disks, I would recommend RAID 6 or SHR 2. What this will give you is the ability for you to lose any one drive of the RAID, and you will keep all of your data and everything will continue running. Your NAS never even has to shut down. That is not a backup, but it is redundancy. So it's very nice for that, so you don't have to worry about a simple hard drive failure causing you to stop. So you can select those all right here. And if I had more drives in here, I'd also see RAID 5 and RAID 6 and more things like that. But we're just going to select simple SHR. If you do not want any redundancy at all, and you just want to additive all of your drives, and you're okay if one drive fails, the entire volume goes away, you can choose either basic or JBOD. Or RAID 0 if you're looking for the fastest possible speeds, and you've got like SSDs as a video editing server or something, then RAID 0. But I've got a video I'll leave down in the description below that really goes over that. But if you're okay with losing one drive due to fault tolerance, so one drive of space, just choose SHR. Then you probably will not see this, but I've got SSDs and HDDs in here. So I get to choose if it's a hard drive volume or an SSD volume, and you can name it. I'm not going to though. Now you select your drives. I'm going to select both of these. And we'll notice that even though we have 2 drives in here, we're only going to get 1 drive worth of space. And if I had a 3rd drive, I would have gotten 2 drives worth of space because of that RAID we talked about earlier. One other thing to note, these are 8 terabyte drives right here, but it's showing them as 7.3 terabytes. What is going on? So what is going on is these are a different unit. This is what's called a TB, which is essentially counting 1024 gigabytes is 1 TB. So it's a slightly different unit. And so when you're at the terabyte scale, it is off by about 10%. When you look at it in macOS or Windows, it will be the normal unit you see. So it's not that the storage is not there. You're just looking at it in a slightly different unit than you're used to. So we're just going to go ahead and hit next. And I would highly recommend performing the drive check. It is going to take up to a couple of days, but what it'll do is it's going to kind of weed out any lemons. So hard drives will often either fail in the first 2 weeks, or after that, they're going to last for years without issue generally. That's because hard drives sometimes are just dead on arrival, and normally that gets found out in the first 2 weeks. So that's why you really want to perform the drive check. And now we get to allocate our volume. A volume is the file system that the data goes on top of. So for the most basic setup, we're just going to choose max and allocate the maximum volume size. Next up, we're going to choose our file system, unless you have a very specific purpose, or this is only for surveillance cameras, choose BTRFS. Trust me, it is absolutely worth it. So many features you will miss out on if you choose ext4 over BTRFS. Definitely choose BTRFS. Next up is encryption. So this will be what's called full volume encryption, which means that if somebody steals your NAS, they will not be able to recover any of the data off of it. One warning here. This means that if you lose this encryption key and you ever need to recover your NAS or anything like that, and you lose the encryption key, you will not be able to recover any of your data either. So before ticking this, you should know one thing. If you lose this file, all your data is gone, effectively. Maybe not now, but sometime in the future, so you need to make sure you have this file in a lot of places. If this is really only for family documents and you're not worried about that happening, you don't have to encrypt it. But if this is for business and you're going to have sensitive documents on there, encrypt it, but make sure you know where you're going to store your key and store it in a lot of places. I'm going to go ahead and select encryption here. And now it's going to ask me for a vault password. I'm going to enter one. Make sure that this is something that you are going to know. I would highly recommend making this that password that your entire family knows or something like that, because the only time somebody will ever even get a chance to use this is if they physically stolen your drive. So it's definitely something that's worth it to make it guessable, especially if this is something that if anything happens to you, you want somebody else to be able to recover. Make it either guessable or don't encrypt it at all. That choice is up to you, but just make sure you're going to be able to have a recovery if you need to, which you do. So I'm just going to enter a password here. And now, once we hit apply, we're going to download a file. And that is going to be a crucial file that you need to download. So hit allow. And now it's also going to pop up here as well that says, yes, I've received the recovery key and we'll keep it safe. This recovery key right here that has just been downloaded, go ahead, upload it to your Google Drive, send it out somewhere, send it to your family. You want to make sure it's going to be recoverable. You should not store it on the NAS, because if you store it on the NAS and the NAS needs it, you're not going to have access to it. So make sure that that file is somewhere safe in a lot of places. The only time someone will ever be able to utilize this file is if they have physical access to the NAS and they're trying to steal your data. So I would absolutely feel comfortable posting on Google Drive, because the chances of somebody breaking into my Google Drive, also breaking into my house and stealing the NAS is so low that who cares at that point? That is such a targeted attack. There's probably a much easier way to get your data. So make sure it is somewhere safe. Really, 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 I'm going to hammer that home, because you do not want to lose that key and one day have your files just disappear. One thing about this is it will work without that key for a very long time, unless you ever need to recover anything, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. So you may become complacent and just say, oh yeah, it's working, and just forget about the key. Seriously, make sure it is somewhere and really make sure you know where it is. I'm going to try to hammer that home as much as possible. All right, we have now built the volume. Great. The next thing we need to go ahead and do is just some very basic settings that I would really recommend. So right now you can see it's performing our drive check, so that is great. What that means it's doing is it is going in and really kind of testing those drives to make sure they're not going to just die randomly. So that's going to take a while, and the NAS is going to be a little slower than usual while that's running. In this case, it's going to be about a day and a half. The first thing we want to do is schedule data scrubbing. And enable a schedule, and select all volumes, and run it every 3 months. You can also, if you want to, set it to only run at certain times. So we can set it to only run at night. And so it's only going to run from the hours of midnight to 5 a.m. And so that way, the performance hit that happens when the data is scrubbing, you're not going to notice. So that's really useful for like an office file server where people are actually working and may see it slow down. Home users, it does not hurt. The scrub only needs to complete within the 3-month period, and it's fine, so don't worry about that. You could run it for an hour a week, and it would probably still finish on time. And then you can also set it to run later. There's some customization in there you don't need to worry about, but these settings right here, perfect for just about everybody. And what that's going to do is it's going to check all the files on the NAS to make sure that they have not gotten corrupted. The cool thing about BTRFS is if they are slightly corrupted, like only one part of the file is corrupted, it has the ability to automatically fix that without you doing anything. And the scrub will automatically fix that. The reason you want to run a scrub every 3 months is you want to make sure that the NAS does not have time to get 2 errors in that section. So if a hard drive has 2 errors on the same bit of data, it might not be recoverable. But as long as there's just one, it is recoverable. And so that way it gets caught before another one happens. Bit rot happens very rarely, but it does happen. And so that's why you want to run it often, and it can really just protect you. All right, so quick interjection here. Nearly completely forgot to add this to the video, so I'm cutting it a little bit later. So one thing we need to do while we are in Storage Manager right here is we need to set up smart tests. And they're very easy to set up. You just go into HDD/SSD and go into Settings, Test Scheduler, and we want to enable a smart test. A smart test essentially automatically has the NAS test the disks for figuring out if they're going to fail soon. Disks are actually quite good at telling you when they're going to die. Not as good as SSDs, but it's always a good idea to run them. So I'm going to say quick. We're going to do a quick smart test on all supported drives, and we are just going to run it once a month. Easy enough to add in. And then we are also going to add in an extended smart for every 6 months. The extended smart test, in my experience, very rarely actually gleams you more information than a short smart test, but it's worth it to run every 6 months just in case it does ever help. So we'll run the quick smart test once a month. They run very quickly, and that way you can keep up with the disks pretty well. And it'll run an extended smart test every 6 months as an extra overhaul, just in case you need it. And that is it. These are just 2 tests you want to set up really quick and easy, just in case you ever need to have them. You will get a notification like, hey, your drive is starting to die. You'll actually also get a lot of this data without even having to use it, because you still get things like UNCs and a bunch of other useful information, but it's just a good idea to have it on there. And that way your health stats get updated a little bit more accurately, and the drive can start telling you, hey, this is what's going on. I'm having issues. I'm going to die, whatever. I've got a video that probably should be out around the time of this that actually goes over exactly when to know when your hard drive is dying. All right, back to the rest of the video now. So now we want to go ahead and create our very first shared folder. A shared folder is essentially a mapped drive in Windows or macOS. And so that's where you're going to see a folder on there, and you're going to be able to attach files to it. So we're going to go into Control Panel, Shared Folder, Create, and create a new shared folder. We're going to just give it a name. And you can enable a recycling bin and a description and choose your volume. Totally up to you on that, but this is pretty simple. Next page gives us the ability to further encrypt it. We don't need to because it's on an encrypted share anyway. Or set up with Worm, much more advanced features. Don't bother with those. Hit skip. And then I would recommend enabling checksum for advanced data integrity. That's a feature of BTRFS. And if you want to limit it to only having maybe a terabyte of data in there, you can do that with the shared folder quota right there. And just click through. The next option gives us the ability to choose who has access to it. We've only got the one user right now, and I'm an administrator, so I automatically get read-write to everything, but you can add stuff later on down the line. And especially if you're a business user, you want to check out groups. So that way you can just have all of your employees in a group and give everybody permissions all at once rather than individually. And now we have this shared folder. So now this shared folder, we can start seeing in macOS Finder or Windows File Explorer very easily. I'm just going to open up macOS Finder really quick. Go into Network, and we will see the name of the NAS right here, the DS923. That's what I named the NAS. This will be whatever you named it. And Windows File Explorer has the exact same thing. Just double click on it and hit Connect As, and type in your Synology username and password that you just set up. These steps are pretty much identical between Windows and macOS, but I will leave a link down to how to do this in Windows File Explorer as well, along with the timestamp where we actually are in this video. and just type in your password and hit connect. And now you can see the folder. We enabled a recycling bin on there, so it has automatically added that in there. And this is looking very much like a regular hard drive to us. So I'm just going to add in some files right here. And I can just copy stuff over just like I would with any other external hard drive and edit folders. Adding everything in just as you would. Really, you can kind of do it exactly how you would with an external hard drive. And so that is how we're able to access it. I'm not going to talk about how to access it outside of your home yet. I'm going to leave a link down in the description below on how to do that because I've just covered it in a very in-depth video, but there are ways to get this exact feel when you're outside the home network. But if you're at home or at the office, depending on where the NAS is, you'll just be able to do that. And you can have multiple users all working on the exact same file system, all editing their own document, everything like that, because it's a NAS, it's network attached. So everybody on the network who has permissions to the NAS will be able to access it. So now let's go back into DSM and see a couple of things that we really want to make sure to install to help protect our NAS. So first off, BTRFS Snapshots. So we're going to go into the Package Center and install BTRFS Snapshots. So to open up the Package Center, you just have to accept the users. And we're going to scroll down until we see a package called Snapshot Replication right here. And we're just going to hit install and hit yes. So BTRFS Snapshots are a combination of a recycling bin and like macOS Time Machine. They allow you to go back to previous versions of files, but they do not take up extra space. So if you take a snapshot and no files have changed since the last snapshot, that snapshot takes up 0 space. And so you can set these up and have the ability to go back to previous versions of files should you ever need them. So it is now installed, and so we're going to go ahead and hit open on it. And we're just going to say, do not show this message again. I'm going to go back to that, don't worry. And now we are just going to go into Snapshots and select our folder. This is that new shared folder we set up. Every single time you add a new folder, you want to add these settings in here. By the way, you can shift select multiple and add them all. And I'm going to go over the basic settings here that everybody should do. Hit settings. And we are going to enable a snapshot schedule. We're going to have it run every 2 hours. And you're not going to need immutable snapshots. That's a much more advanced feature. And now for our retention, this is going to be the important part. We're going to enable a retention policy, and we're going to set it to be advanced. So we're going to set the rules. We're going to say keep all snapshots for 5 days, and then we're going to untick everything else except for the day of the week. For most people, I would say 30 days. The way you read this is you're going to have a snapshot, the granularity of 2 hours for the past 5 days. And then after that, you're going to have a 1 day granularity for the past 30 days. What this is effectively going to mean for you is from the moment you delete a file to the moment your space back will be 30 days. Because as long as there's a snapshot, it's going to hold on to the file and not let it get deleted. And so you won't get your space back. So whenever you're thinking about this, you just need to think about that right there. So for most people, you're probably not deleting files that often, and so 30 days should be totally fine. You can also set this up to maybe even 60 days, depending on your storage needs. And for people who very rarely delete files and end up with a lot of extra space, I've done 180 days. These are awesome because it allows you to go back to previous versions of files and really protect yourself. And so if your NAS gets ransomware, like your computer gets a virus and starts encrypting files on the NAS, this is just an undo button. Incredibly powerful. Really, really, really set this up for every single shared folder you create. I promise you it is worth it. We're just going to hit OK. And the last thing I like to do is make these snapshots visible right there because that allows you to very easily see the previous versions of files without having to mess with DSM or anything like that. I'm not going to go over these in depth, but I will leave a link to a video that I've gone in and really showed exactly how they work because it is well worth it for you to use. But just know that they allow you to go back to previous versions of files should you ever need them. It's going to look like you've got 80 copies of the exact same file on your system. It's going to look like that, but it's not taking up 80 times the space. It's very efficient and it only is really holding on to files. And so you should really think about it from the moment you delete a file to the moment your space back will be however many days you set there. So that is huge. I'll get off my soapbox with that. And now we'll go in and we're going to go into Control Panel and set up a couple of things I like to do here. First off, we want to go into Security, and we want to make sure that under Protection, we have Auto Block enabled. 10 within 5 minutes is a great place to start. This keeps people from being able to just raw password guess. And so this is very, very useful to have. And so that way people just can't flood your NAS with random password guesses because they will get blocked very quickly. These setups would take, I think I calculated out as like 2.5 million years to have a 50% chance of guessing a 8-digit password. So yeah, you're going to be safe with that. Don't worry about that. Even if somebody's doing 9 every 5 minutes, that's how long it would take for them to have a 50% chance of getting in. Firewall, you probably do not need, but I'll leave a link to a tutorial going over all that down in the description below. And then account, you can set up your 2-factor authentication right here. And a great thing here is the automatic MFA that happens with DSM 7.2. So if it's very weird of you, you'll automatically be enrolled in that, which is great. And then the rest of these settings are not crucial. The next thing we are going to go into is scroll down to power. So these are a few power settings here. I tend to like to enable restart automatically when power supply issue is fixed. So that way, if you have a power outage and the power comes back on, your NAS just boots back up automatically. One thing you may want to look at buying is a UPS, especially if it's for a business. I would recommend a UPS that will automatically allow your NAS to safely shut down before it runs out of power. So that's what's called a smart UPS. So essentially what that is a battery that automatically kicks in if the power goes out and will tell your NAS, hey, we've only got about 10 minutes of power left. You should go ahead and just shut down safely. So that way you don't have an unexpected power loss, which can cause issues in very rare circumstances. So having a UPS can be very useful, especially if it's for a business. Then one thing I always like to mention is if you ever have your NAS beeping, come in here, go to Hardware Power General Beep Control, and you can mute it, and it will also tell you why it's beeping. It's very hard to find that for people, and so this is super useful to tell what's going on and why your NAS is beeping at you. Then you've got the fan speed mode. For most people, quiet and cool mode are all you're ever going to need, but if you are running hot and you've got very hot hard drives and you want the maximum performance and you're doing something hard, you can run up to full speed mode, but honestly, cool mode normally will be good enough for just about everybody. I very rarely need full speed mode ever, unless it's in a really, really, really hot room, and that's pretty much why. And you can also have the LEDs change brightness and even have a schedule, which is quite nice, especially if it's in your bedroom. Power schedule allows you to boot up and shut down your NAS on a power schedule. Very rarely ever useful. HDD hibernation. I like to set this from 20 minutes to at least 3 hours generally. That way, you don't want your NAS having the drive spin up, shut down, spin up, shut down, spin up, shut down a ton, because it actually can lower the lifetime of the drives themselves. Generally, NAS drives are designed to run 24/7, and so having them spin up and start and stop actually can lower their life cycle, and it can actually take a very long time if the NAS is hibernating to get back in. So if you're very rarely using the NAS, you will also want to enable advanced hibernation, which goes really into a deep sleep. But if you're using the NAS daily, you probably want to uncheck that. The last important thing we want to go ahead and do down here is go into our task scheduler. And we want to make sure we've got one really crucial task set up, and that is to empty recycling bins. I cannot over-exaggerate how often this has been an issue for people because it's not something that's easily seen. And so if you don't have a task that automatically empties the recycling bin, the stuff that you delete will never get space back. And so you want to set up a task that automatically empties recycling bins. And I always just call it empty bin. And it's going to run every single night. And it's going to say anything that has been in the recycling bin for more than 3 days, the real stuff will be snapshots. So snapshots are on top of this. So this recycling bin is only useful for that. I deleted something, I need to get it back right then. And so for 3 days, and we're going to empty all the recycling bins. That should be good for pretty much everybody. It's going to say, do you want to enable a recycling bin for all shared folders? You can if you want to, but I normally say no. And that way, the recycling bin just does not stack up a ton. And now we've gone through really the basics. I want to touch on a couple of things just really quickly with permissions. So with permissions, you want to go into users and groups, and this is where you can start having multiple people able to log into the NAS. So especially if you're a business user, and I would really recommend everybody do this, you can set up everybody to have their own user account. So say you've got a friend called Tim. You can just give them a random password, and that way you can have them with their own account. You don't want everybody to be an administrator, so only people who really need to be an administrator should be an administrator. And now you can say what folders they have permission to. So let's give them access to demo. We can also give them read only or read write. I very rarely would ever use the no access button because by default they have no access. And so it ends up overriding the permissions. You can look right here as the way the permissions work is no access overwrites everything. Read write, then read only. So it's kind of a little bit more advanced, but normally you're only going to be adding permissions rather than restricting them. So we'll give him read write to there, and we'll just click through and give him access to whatever programs we like, only if you ever need to. And now he will be able to log in with his own password right in there. And so that is an easy way to do permissions. If you're a business, you want to look at groups where you can essentially just add people to a group, and then they will just use the permissions of that group to do everything. Really, really efficient. So now let's say we want to take away the permission from Tim. We can do that either here. So we can just go into the actual folder and hit edit and go into permissions and assign anybody who we want permission to it. So we can say, all right, Tim, actually, we only want him to have read only. And you can really set that up however you like to. And so that is how you manage permissions for multiple users. I'm not going to go over groups here, but it is a really useful thing to have. So you can have like a family group or an employees group, and they all automatically have access to the shared folders. The last thing I want to touch on with users is this admin user. So this is the admin account that the internal system uses to manage everything. So you cannot remove it, but you want to make sure it's always deactivated. So you should always have this deactivated because it is guessable. Somebody can guess the username admin. So you want to make sure it's always deactivated. And if you need a new admin account, you create a new account. And you add them to the administrators group. But you never add them as the admin, the one that is actually labeled admin. It's a bit confusing there. So that is just one thing to note. All right. And so that is pretty much it. I want to now talk about a few really useful videos that I would highly recommend people watch to kind of get started. And let me actually just pull up YouTube entirely. All right, so we are going to blaze through a few of these videos that I just think are really useful to know for more or less everybody. One really good one to watch is the Complete Remote Access Guide. By the way, we will leave links to all these down in the description below. So Complete Remote Access Guide, that talks about all the different ways you can access your NAS from outside of your home network. And so that really kind of goes over that entire setup. If you're looking at upgrading, this is probably something you should have watched before buying NAS, best upgrade, but that can be very useful. Then if you're looking at Synology Photos, this is a great guide. The Complete Synology Photo Guide goes over everything that you need to know to use Synology Photos, from backing up your phone to sharing with people, everything like that you need to do. Then definitely most commonly asked questions. I try to go through these for people who have really never set up a NAS before and really have not used a Synology. It's worth a watch. I kind of just blaze through the most basic stuff that's kind of confusing. I would have pinned it to this video if I had not already made that video. Then most common mistakes that new users make, probably worth a watch. You should be covered for most of the stuff already on here, but you probably want to. Then there's the last two things. One is going to be backups. I'm not going to touch on it a ton here, but if you're just starting out and you don't have a backup yet, highly recommend getting an external drive and at least backing up your most important stuff. That way, if your hard drives crash or something crazy happens, you have a backup. So what backup methods to use really explains over all the different versions there. And then finally, if you want to learn more about BTRFS Snapshots, this goes over everything about them and also how they work, which is definitely worth a watch in my opinion. So I would really recommend checking those out. I'll also leave a link to the Synology Drive demo and kind of explaining how that works. And that should be everything that really I would recommend watching to get started in understanding. There's a lot of content there, and so you don't necessarily have to watch all of them, but watch the ones that are applicable to you. And overall, that should be set up and running. Your NAS is now running, and you can easily add files to it and use it really like an external drive. Anytime you need to add files or new packages, you just go into the package center here and can just install anything you need to right there really simply. And you can get more and more features out of your NAS by doing that. There's a ton you can do. All right, well, that's it for this. Go and leave any other questions you've got for me down in the comments below. And I also have forums.spacerex.co. I'll leave a link to that there. And for more explicit stuff, YouTube's pretty bad about being able to actually have a conversation. And so more advanced issues, go ahead and post on the forums. I'm checking it daily. Happy to reply there. And that way, especially future people who have the same issue can just find it via Google, which is great. All right, have a good one. Bye.